Very warm welcome to all of you. I'm Satchit Balsari, part of the gang that's responsible for dragging you here on Marathon Day. So really, really appreciate you braving the traffic and the closures to get here. Before we get started, I want to introduce a really delightful team of graduate students that I cannot see here right now. The entire team, they're right here. The reason this exhibition was possible, I want to introduce to you Hiteshree Das, who really is the prime mover behind this exhibit. And over the course of the next half an hour or so, we'll hear about how and why this exhibit, why we're having this conversation, why this arts project from the House of Medicine. But if it weren't for Hiteshree's confidence in this idea, we wouldn't have pulled this through. She's a graduate student at GSD, and as are Karthik Girish, next to her, William Bowles, and Sharik Shah from the Graduate School of Design. Next, flanking Sharik are our digital wizards. Bobby in the red jacket is singularly responsible for that gorgeous multi-screen display that you passed on your way in. And there's quite an interesting story about how that was made. And I hope you have an opportunity to speak to Bobby when we're back outside about it. A little clue that I will give you about this exhibit is that none of us knew what we were doing, but we sort of muddled through. And apparently when Bobby said he would build the display for us, even he didn't know that what it would entail. And we're just delighted that we're here. Deepak Ramola, a recent graduate from the School of Education, is a filmmaker, and a lot of the editorial work that you see from the footage, as well as the work that went into scripting the You're on Mute installation, was Deepak's work. Missing is Karthikeya Bhattotia, who should join us in a few minutes, from the Kennedy School, who really helped with a lot of the research and the writing that you see on the walls. This is a very large team. You see other names on it. Salman Rafe from the Mittal Institute, Bettina Vishwesh from the National Institute of Design, and lots of current and past graduate students from Harvard have pitched in. None of this, of course, would have been possible without the trust put in us by the Self-Employed Women's Association, a group of 3 million women from the informal sector in India. 90% of India's labor force is in the informal sector, which means that they do not have the social protections that you would need to survive a public health emergency like the pandemic. This is a story of how the women managed to navigate the greatest public health emergency of our times through 5 decades of investments in their own communities. Just like the exhibit, I thought it is best that we hear from SEWA and SEWA members themselves, rather than us trying to distill their voices for you. It is my pleasure, therefore, to welcome here today 3 members of SEWA, 2 of whom will join us on stage. Kapilaben, right behind us. We will hear from Kapilaben today, but you will also visit her in a couple of the installations. Reema Nanavaty, the director of SEWA. And for gender balance, Bhailalbhai Hebar, the medical director and multiple hat wearer at SEWA. Also a key collaborator with several colleagues here at Harvard on a range of projects that we're engaged in. I want to acknowledge a lot of folks that are in the audience who were pivotal in supporting this enterprise, in particularly the Mittal Institute and the Office of the Provost. And I thank Laurie Gross for her kindness and her trust in making this exhibition possible. Rahul Malhotra, Shushtaf Gayos, Doris Summers, and Tarun Khanna have played a larger role than they have realized in this team's thinking and in my own exploration of fields that I knew nothing about, and the ability to do it. And it was these 3 and 4 colleagues from the university who've played a major role over the last decade in influencing our choice. Hiteshree was a student in a class that all 5 of us teach together. And we hope that we've done justice to what my colleagues have taught in this class. Without much ado, I would like to welcome Sarita Gupta. Sarita has joined us from the Ford Foundation. She's vice president at the Ford Foundation for US Affairs. She used to be the director of Future of Work, Workers program at the Ford Foundation, bringing 2 decades of experience working to expand people's ability to take collective action to improve their workplaces and communities. As director, she spearheaded the launch of several far-reaching initiatives. The one that I mentioned here at the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic is that she brought together major funders to launch the Families and Workers Fund, which now stands at $52 million, and the $50 million Care Fund to address the immediate needs of low-wage workers. She will tell you what her long relationship with SEWA has been like. After we hear from Kapilaben and Reema Ben, Rishi, Goyal, and I will join you in conversation for a few before we head back outside. Sarita, may I welcome you down too? And Reema Ben and Kapilaben. We'll call you down.
All good. Good evening. It is lovely to be here with all of you. As Dr. Balsari said, my name is Sarita Gupta, and I'm the Vice President of US Programs at the Ford Foundation. And I really want to thank him in particular and the Mittal Institute for curating this inspiring event and for inviting me to share a few words on the peerless work of SEWA. SEWA was established in 1972 by the late, great Bhailalbhai as a collective of poor, self-employed women addressing the exploitation and abuse of street vendors, waste recyclers, head loaders, farmers, artisans, and shopkeepers who every day scratched a life of quiet survival. Since then, SEWA has become a platform for 3 million women across India to access financial services, gain skills, and assert their rights and leadership. The Ford Foundation's support for SEWA began in 1979, marking a 45-year-old partnership with its mission, its vision, and its goals. We've made over 30 grants to SEWA in this time. As Bhailalbhai once noted, philanthropists should help people help themselves to stand on their own, keeping their dignity, and help them to be productive and creative in their acts, to build up their collective strength, to think, to act, and to participate in nation building. Her words are with me every day. At Ford, we know we are not the authority of the groups we support. We are their companions. And indeed, in many ways, their students. This is nowhere more true than in SEWA. Staring across this exhibition, I feel both the weight and the life of SEWA's work in India and what they've meant to the movement for justice across the globe. Each installation sheds light on the vision of an inclusive democracy, one that centers women, that SEWA has brought to life. This history brings to memory a few lines by the poet Kai Miller, who once wrote, "Draw me a map of what you see, and I'll draw you a map of what you never see. And guess whose map will be bigger than whose? Guess whose map will draw a larger truth?" For over 50 years, the Sisters of SEWA have been map makers, pushing against the erasure of women's leadership and shaping the ways we think about contested borderlands of democracy, women's rights, and economic freedom. And these were often very hard and very unpopular battles. In 1975, understanding that capital was critical to improve the lives of its members and that no institution would serve the needs of women who lacked literacy and assets, SEWA took the bold move to set up a bank for marginalized women. Today in Massachusetts, it's perhaps hard to imagine the difficulty of establishing a bank to support a women-centered economic democracy. But in the 1970s India, that move was not particularly intertwined with the social issues of the day. In fact, it was outright radical. In the subsequent decades, SEWA continued to grow and returned again and again to where the pressure was, from rural healthcare to community banking. They trained millions of members on livelihood skills. They built a unique community healthcare program for poor working mothers that led to the creation of a sustainable model of rural health entrepreneurs. They built SEWA Bank to improve facilities and cost-effective financial services to low-income rural and urban women who have little or no assets except their labor. They introduced SEWA Academy, a unique grassroots research endeavor for representing the value of work done by women in the informal economy, making the invisible visible. They founded Vimo SEWA, a pioneering integrated insurance program for self-employed women. This is just a fraction of what SEWA shaped into being since 1972, and just a glimmer of how their work has become a reflective surface of what an inclusive economy can and must look like. For many US-based organizations, advocates and organizers, SEWA has modeled and been a source of inspiration for what is possible for women in the informal economy. This is especially critical today, given the current discussions about the future of work and workers, as we confront the changing nature of work and its implication on the growing ranks of self-employed workers and the rise of gig workers. And over the last 4 pandemic years, SEWA brought their thesis to life with even more voice and density. As this exhibition shows, the pandemic spurred a nationwide lockdown in India, pushing millions of women workers to the systemic edge. Their workspaces were uprooted, and their homes became sites of closure. It was a totalizing grief. Countless women previously disconnected from the digital age were rendered adrift when so much moved online. Essential groceries and personal protective equipment were out of reach. Children's education became inaccessible overnight. Vaccination services were wholly opaque. These harms were both unbearable and overfamiliar to women in India. But SEWA drew on half a century of community building, horizontal leadership, and grassroots innovation to meet the crisis of the pandemic. It wasn't a spontaneous flowering of advocacy, but an aggregate of effort to suture this wound. SEWA immediately began training its members on how to use smartphones and launched digital financial literacy programs so members and non-members could access pandemic relief resources. They gave out 0% interest loans to street vendors to help bring equilibrium to a moment of sheer panic. They provided educational assignments to children so they could learn from home when schools were shuttered. They launched a massive awareness campaigns on physical distancing and hygiene, stood up telemedicine consulting service free of charge, and even provided places for quarantine and refuge. SEWA not only worked hard to meet the needs of their local members, but also to advance inclusive policies at the global level. They dialogued across distances in the International Labor Conference, influenced World Bank conversations, lifting up the need for labor and social protections for workers in the informal economy. And they presented at other fora to showcase what's possible when women are the main mast in building towards an economy of nurturance. And as Ilaben started this fire, Reema Ben and Kapilaben, along with millions of SEWA members, are keeping it alight. as part of an unbroken 50-year meditation on women-led community building. Hum SAB EK, we are one. Not only is this one of the greatest hymns to the human spirit, it's become an organizing principle across generations because of SEWA. This sense of purpose is alive across this exhibition, and taken together, these installations are a portrait of the possible, when women lead, when we are one, and when justice grows from common soil, the future can be born. With that, I'm really excited to now join Reema Ben and Kapilaben in a discussion about this exhibit and their work. So after providing a little bit of that overview of your incredible work and impact, I want to start actually with you, Kapilaben. I wonder if you can tell us how you got involved with SEWA.
એમ પૂછે છે કે તમે સેવામાં કેવી રીતે જોડાયા અને તમે જોડાયા તો તમારા જીવનમાં શું ફેર આવ્યો? ટૂંકું બોલીને અટકજો.
નમસ્તે, મારું નામ કપિલાબેન છે. હું આણંદ જિલ્લાના રાસનોલ ગામમાંથી આવું છું. હું એક ખેતમજૂર બેન છું અને હું 23 વર્ષથી સેવા સાથે જોડાયેલી છું અને હું છેલ્લા 12 વર્ષથી સેવાના પ્રમુખ તરીકે મારી ફરજ બજાવેલી છે.
I'm Kapilaben. I come from Rasnol village in Anand district of Gujarat. I'm a small farmer and a member of SEWA for 23 years now. And since last 12 years, I've been elected as the president of SEWA.
છેલ્લા આ 23 વર્ષ પહેલાંની તમે જુઓ તો હું બહુ ગુલામગીરીના જીવનમાં હતી. 4 દિવાલની અંદર મારું જીવન ચાલતું હતું. મારું કોઈ માન નહીં, મારું કોઈ સન્માન નહીં. બહાર ગામમાં જઈએ તો લોકો ફલાણાના બહુ એવી રીતે ઓળખતા હતા, એટલે મારી કોઈ ઓળખ પણ નથી.
Life before 23 years, when I was not a member of SEWA, was very different, confined to the four walls of my home. I did not have any identity. I was known as somebody's wife or somebody's daughter-in-law. I could not even go to the local market on my own. And that was the life of every worker at SEWA.
સેવામાં જોડાવાથી મારી પોતાની એક ઓળખ ઊભી થઈ કે હું એક આજે ગર્વથી કહી શકું છું કે એક ખેતમજૂર બેન છું એમ. અને સેવામાં જોડાવાથી મારી પોતાની તો ઓળખ થઈ, પણ સાથે સાથે મારું માન પણ વધ્યું, ઘરની અંદર પણ માન વધ્યું, ગામમાં પણ માન વધ્યું અને સરપંચ અને તલાટી સાથે પણ અમારા કોન્ટેક્ટ ચાલુ થઈ ગયા એમ.
Having become a member of SEWA, the biggest asset that I got is my own identity as a worker. I am now identified as a worker. I also am seen with respect in my own family, in the community. I can go up and speak up in front of the panchayat, in front of the commissioner, and that is what SEWA brings to us.
સેવામાં તમે સવાલ કર્યો કે સેવામાં કેવી રીતે જોડાયા, તો જ્યારે રોજગારી ઉપર જ્યારે અસર પડી અને રોજગારી ઉપર જ્યારે પ્રશ્ન ઊભો થયો ત્યારે સેવા સાથે અમારું સંકલન થયું. અમને એવી ખબર નથી કે સરકારના રેટ ઉપર 7 રૂપિયા ચાલે છે, પણ ખડીમાં 14 રૂપિયા રેટ ચાલતો હતો અને અમને માલિક 7 રૂપિયા ચૂકવતા હતા. પણ સેવાની સાથે જોડાયા, ટ્રેનિંગો મળી અને અમારામાં જે જાગૃતતા આવી ત્યાર પછી અમારી રોજગારી પણ વધી અને સેવાના સાથે ત્યારથી અમારી ઓળખ ચાલુ થઈ એમ.
So you asked me, Sarita ji, how did I get involved with SEWA? It was only when, our livelihoods were affected. The government had declared 14 rupees as the daily wage for women workers who work in the tobacco factories, while we were exploited by the factory owners and we were paid only 7 rupees. And it was then that we became the members of SEWA and we understood that, how the exploitation of the workers happen.
સેવામાં સહેલાઈથી નહોતું જોડાવાતું, કેમ કે ઘરના પર દબાણો આવતા હતા, સાસુ સસરાના પણ આવતા હતા, પતિના પણ દબાણ આવતા હતા. પણ મનમાં એવું થયું કે ના, સેવા કંઈક તો કામ કરીએ. જો 7 રૂપિયામાં 14 રૂપિયા આપી શકતા હોય, રોજગારી ઉપર આ પ્રભાવ પડતો હોય અને બહેનોની જાગૃતતા માટે કામ કરતા હોય, તો કેમ સેવામાં ના? તો સેવામાં પછી અમે ચાલુ પડી ગયા.
It was not easy to become a member of SEWA. There was so much of resistance from my own family, my parents-in-law, my husband, the community. Everybody was against a woman, a laborer, becoming a member of SEWA. But when SEWA starts bringing change in the earnings and in the livelihoods of the lives of women workers, that is what gives us the strength and the courage to fight back the family pressures.
સેવામાં જોડાયા તો જાગૃતતાનું એક તો કારણ બન્યું કે અમે કોઈ 5 વ્યક્તિ સામે નહોતા બોલી શકતા, આજે લાખોની સામે બોલી શકીએ છીએ, એટલે એટલી તો અમારામાં શક્તિ આવી ગઈ. બીજું કે સંગઠન પણ અમારું એટલું મજબૂત થતું ગયું છે. અને ખાસ અમારા બેન એવું તો અમને કહેતા ગયા હતા કે બહેનો પાસે કોઈ મિલકત નહીં હોય તો ચાલશે, પણ રોટી કપડાં મકાન તો એમની પાસે હોવું જોઈએ. તો અમે અમારા બહેનોને એટલા સુધી તો અમે પહોંચાડી પાડ્યું. બીજું કે બહેનોની ઓળખ પણ ઊભી કરાવી, અમારા સભ્ય બહેનોના જીવનમાં એમની પોતાની માલિકી ઊભી કરાવી, એમના નિર્ણય લેતા કરાયા. એ પોતે બીજાની સાથે સાહુકારની જોડે પોતાના પતિ સામે હાથ લાંબો કરતા હતા, ત્યાં બંધ કરી અને પોતે એક માલિક તરીકે પોતાની બચત ઊભી કરી એમના બાળકોને ભણાવવા માટે પણ નિર્ણય.
Having become a member of SEWA, it's not only brought identity to us, but it also helps us build the collective strength. When earlier we were not even able to speak up and demand in front of a money lender or even our own husbands, today we have our own savings, we have our own identity, and our founder had told us that if you can't have anything else, but at least every woman should have access to 3 basic things, which is food, clothing and shelter, and that is what we have been able to provide to each and every member of SEWA. And I think our biggest asset is the values in which we believe, the values which has made us tide over to this 5-decade long journey, and that has brought identity to every worker.
ખાસ સેવાના મૂલ્યના આધારિત અમે જઈએ છીએ તો મૂલ્ય અમારા માટે એટલા માટે મહત્ત્વના છે કે શ્રમ જેવી બહેનોની કોઈ વેલ્યુ નથી, પણ એ વેલ્યુ પણ સેવાએ અપાઈ છે. બીજું ખાસ તમને મારો મેસેજ એ આપવો છે કે સેવા સંગઠન કોઈ પ્રોજેક્ટ ઉપર કામ નહીં કરતી, પણ સેવા એવા સભ્યજી જોડે કામ કરે છે કે એમના જીવનમાં શું જરૂરિયાત છે એની ઉપર કામ કરે છે, અને જ્યારે એની ઉપર કામ કર્યું છે ત્યારે જ સેવાનું સંગઠન આગળને આગળ વધતું ગયું છે. બીજું ખાસ મારે એ સંદેશો તમને આપવો છે કે અત્યારે જુઓ તો એટલું બધું આમ વાતાવરણ તંગ થઈ ગયું છે, પણ એવા વાતાવરણની અંદર પણ અમારા સભ્યોને મારે જાળવી રાખવા પડે છે. એમને 365 દિવસ કેવી રીતે રોજગારી મળે એની સાથે મારે સાંકળી રાખવા પડે છે.
So our biggest strength is the value, which brings us the collective strength, which has helped us keep together as one, as sisters. We come together as poor, as women and as workers, and that is the value which we would continue, which we will have to continue going forward as well. The second thing I want to say is that SEWA doesn't work on project to project, but I think what our basic fundamental is that how do you identify what are the needs or the issues of your members, and based on that, how do you ensure that every member gets work and income security for 365 days, and that is what we believe in. And last is that there are innumerable challenges and struggles that one has to overcome, but it is that collective strength which gives us the courage to overcome these struggles and challenges. ટૂંકું બોલજો, પછી એમને બીજો પ્રશ્ન પૂછવો છે.
અને ખાસ બીજું પણ કહું છું કે સેવામાં અમારા બધી સભ્ય જોડે બહુ પડકારો આવ્યા. એમના જીવનમાં બહાર નીકળવા માટે પડકાર આવ્યા, પોતાના પતિ સાથે સહન કરવું પડ્યું, ઘરમાં પણ બધું સહન કરવું પડ્યું, પણ કુદરતના વાતાવરણથી પણ સહન કરતા હતા. પણ એવું ક્યારેય નહોતું વિચાર્યું કે આવી પણ એવી આફત આવશે કે જીવનમાં કદી જોઈ નથી, તે કોવિડ અને કોરોના વખતે. એ અમારા માટે બહુ મહત્ત્વની થઈ ગઈ, અને જીવનમાં જેવું નહોતું ધાર્યું એવું પણ એ તકલીફ કેવી રીતે આવી એ પણ અમને પોતાના ખુદને ખબર નથી એમ.
So as I said, there are innumerable struggles and challenges, and climate is another major challenge that we have to continuously keep facing. But the one major challenge that we overcame, that was of COVID, the pandemic, which we hadn't even dreamt of. We hadn't even heard of that. What is this COVID? And what what would it entail and bring to us. And but together we were able to overcome that.
20 માર્ચ અમારા જીવનમાં કાયમ માટે યાદ રહી ગઈ છે, કેમ કે સભ્ય બહેનોને એવી પણ ખબર નથી કે કેવી રીતે હાથ ધોવા, એકબીજાની સાથે ભેગું નહીં થવાનું, કેવી રીતે એમની વાતચીત કરવી, કશું જ અમારા સભ્યને ખબર નથી પડતી. અમને પોતાને પણ એવી ખબર નથી, પણ અમને ટ્રેનિંગો આપીને તૈયાર કરી અમે અમારા સભ્ય સાથે સંકલન કર્યું. અમને તો ટેકનોલોજીનું જ્ઞાન પણ નહોતું, પણ સેવાનો આભાર માને છે કે અમે ભણેલા નથી, ડિગ્રીવાળા નથી, પણ એટલું તો અમને મોબાઈલ શીખવાડી દીધો કે જેથી કરીને જ્યારે લોકડાઉન ને એવું થયું ત્યારે એ ટેકનોલોજીથી અમે અમારા સભ્ય સુધી પહોંચી શક્યા, એમનો વિશ્વાસ જીતી શક્યા, એમના જીવનમાં શું કાર્ય છે.
So 20th March 2020, we will never forget in our life, because that was the day when lockdown was declared. We did not know what a lockdown is. We hadn't even heard that, what is social distancing. We all live in small little homes or in huts in the slums. And what is social distancing? Why do you have to continuously keep washing your hands? And so everybody was like, very confused, and we were all baffled that what is this? How are we going to overcome? Normally when a crisis happens, we rush to our members, but here we were continuously told that, keep away, and there was so much of fear that was created. But I'm very grateful to SEWA that, technology was put in our hands, and it was through technology that we continued keeping in touch with our members. Our organizing continued. Can she continue, or you have a question?
No, please, because my next question was absolutely about the impacts of COVID. So go ahead, please.
ચાલુ રાખ.
અને ખાસ એ પણ થયું કે કોવિડ વખતે આવ્યું તો ગામના દુકાનોવાળા પણ ખાવા માટે અનાજ નહોતા આપતા, એમની પાસે પણ ખતમ થઈ ગયેલું. સગા સંબંધી પણ કોન્ટેક્ટમાં નહીં રહેલા, કેમ કે એમને બીક હતી કે કોરોના આપણને પાઈ જશે તો આપણો જીવ જતો રહેશે. આવી બધી કન્ડિશનમાં પણ સેવાની બહેનો એટલી સ્ટ્રોંગ તે વખતે બની ગઈ ટેકનોલોજીથી અને એકબીજાના સાથ સહકારથી. એટલે જે અમારી પોતાની ખુદની જે રૂડી કંપની હતી, એ રૂડી કંપની અમારા એક આગેવાન બહેનનું જ નામ છે, અને એક રૂડી કંપની જે ખેતરમાં ઉત્પાદકથી માંડી અને ચેક સભ્ય ખાય છે ત્યાં સુધીની રોજગારી અંદર સમાવેશ થયેલી છે. અને એ કંપનીમાંથી જ્યારે અમે અમારા સભ્યોને પોષક આહાર જ્યારે લોકડાઉન વખતે પહોંચાડ્યું ત્યારે કોઈને એમને સપોર્ટ ના કર્યો, પણ સેવાની બહેનો એમના ઘરે ઘરે જઈ કલેક્ટરની જોડેથી લખાણ લઈ અને બહેનોના ઘેર એમનો પોષક આહાર અમે પૂરો પાડ્યો. ત્યારે એમના બહેનોના આંખમાંથી આંસુ પણ આવી ગયા. ખરેખર સગા જ્યારે સંબંધી આપણા હાથ નથી પકડતા, સેવાની બહેનોનો ધન્ય છે કે એમણે આવા સમયોમાં પણ અમારો હાથ પકડ્યો છે.
So when the lockdown happened, we were not even prepared for it. Not only did our work and income stop, but we also did not know how can we have access to food, because none of us could afford to store food for days and weeks together. And it was at that time that, Rudy, our own agribusiness company, Rudy is the name of one of our first agriculture workers, where we procure from the small farmers, grade, process and package. So that's our local decentralized supply chain. That's where I think in Rudy, because we were all locally there, when the ration shops were also closed, the grocery shops were closed, how do you ensure that your members have access to food? So it was through this Rudy that we ensured that every woman and her household has access to food. And when even the family members, even your close relatives were all not there to help you, it was the members of SEWA who were helping each other. And that's what brought tears to our members. That is what SAB EK, or we are all one and we are all together, means for us, the sisterhood and solidarity, which helps us tide over any struggle that would come through.
અમારી કંપનીમાં એવું તો છે, એટલે એમ હતું કે મોટી કંપની થાય ના, પણ બહેનોને રોજગારી કેવી રીતે મળે એ અમારો ધ્યેય હતો. બીજું ખાસ કે આમ ગર્વ એટલા માટે થાય છે કે ભણેલા ગણેલા કંપનીના માલિક હોય છે, પણ શ્રમજીવી બહેનોની તો કંઈ કંપની જ નહીં હોતી. પણ સેવાનો આભાર માને છે કે અમે ઉત્પાદક પણ પોતે છીએ, માલિક પણ પોતે છે, અને અમે મેનેજર પોતે કંપનીના છે. એનું અમને ગર્વ છે કે શ્રમજીવી બહેનોને માન મળ્યું છે એમ.
So the objective of our Rudy company is to not gather a lot of profit, but how do you ensure that you provide food security to millions and millions of our members, and where we are the owners and the managers of that company? You would have seen so many companies where there's somebody is owning the company, but here women like me are the owners and managers, and therefore we were able to take quick decisions that, how can we distribute and ensure food security to our members. And that is what therefore there is a strong sense of belongingness at SEWA.
અને લોકડાઉન કોરોનાની વખતની વાત કરું તો તે વખતે બધું જ બંધ હતું, સુમસામ હતું, પણ ખાલી સેવાના બહેનો જ બધે ચાલુ હતા. અને એવા સમયમાં પણ કંપનીઓવાળા કંપનીઓ બંધ કરી, પણ સેવાએ કદી એમની રોજગારી બંધ કરી નહીં. ઘરે બેઠા પણ માસ્ક પણ બહેનોને બનાવવા માટે આપ્યા. અમારી બીજી ત્રીજી ચોથી પેઢી જે અમે તૈયાર કરી રહ્યા છીએ એમણે પણ અમને ઘણો બધો સપોર્ટ કર્યો. અને બીજું કે ખરેખર જે બહેનોને જોતું હતું, જે સાથ અને સપોર્ટ, અને ખાલી એક ફોન કરીએ અને બહેનો આપણી સાથે વાત કરે તો આંખમાંથી એમના આંસુ આવી જાય, એ અમે બહુ નજરોએ નિહાળ્યું છે. અને ત્યારે અમને આમ થયું કે ખરેખર સેવાનું સંગઠન કેટલું મજબૂત છે. અને અમે પ્રભુનો પણ આભાર માનીએ છીએ કે અમને કોઈને કશી અસર નહીં થઈ. એ અમારા શ્રમજીવી બહેનોનો આશીર્વાદ છે અમારી પર.
Large companies and big supply chains came to a grinding halt, but a small company which was owned and managed by women like us continued, and it continued giving work and income. I'm not just talking about food alone, but we had our textile and clothing, the artisans company, which immediately repurposed and started stitching masks and the PPE suits, and that's how women continued getting work and income. And that is what makes us, a very strong union, that we are the owners, we are the managers. We would call our members every day to find out, what their situation was, and we ensured that work that does not stop even for one day for our members, because their survival was at stake. And therefore, I think a lot of people suffered from COVID. Many people lost lives, but it was the hard work of women workers and the blessings of God that none of us suffered from COVID, and we could tide over the situation.
તમને એમ લાગતું હશે કે આ શ્રમજીવી બેન કેટલું બધું બોલે છે, પણ 30 લાખનું જોડ લઈને આવી છું ને એટલે બોલવું પડે છે. કેમ કે 30 લાખ સભ્યો મારા જેવા જ છે કે એ આવી ગરીબ પરિસ્થિતિમાંથી બહાર નીકળેલા છે. એમણે પણ પડકારોનો બહુ સામનો કર્યો છે. એટલા આટલો આમ પાવર એટલો બધો વધી જાય છે એમની તાકાતથી. એટલે ખાસ તમારો બધાનો હું આભાર માનું છું કે તમે મને આટલું બોલવા માટેનો સમય, બધું કહેવા જો તો બધું બહુ લાંબુ છે, પણ સમયનું મને થોડુંક માપ આપ્યું છે.
You all may be thinking that, she's speaking so much, but I am here on behalf of our 3 million members, and that is why I have to bring to you and share the struggle of these 3 million members. And when I remember my 300 millions, I get that strength and courage to speak here in front of you all. And I have been asked that I have to be very brief, but it's a long struggle of 5 decades. So how much ever brief I try to be, but I have to say certain things.
એટલે આમ તો પ્રોફેસરો તો નોટમાં જ જોઈને ભણાવે છે અને એ ચોપડીનું જ્ઞાન લે છે, પણ જ્યારે એક શ્રમજીવી બહેનોની એક સેવા યુનિવર્સિટીમાંથી જ્યારે અમે ભણ્યા છીએ તો અમને જિંદગી કેવી રીતે શીખવું ને કયા પડકારો સામે સામનો કરવો એની તાકાત અમને સેવા યુનિવર્સિટીએ આપી છે.
Professors teach from textbooks and the notes that they prepare, but for us, our whole life experience is a university, and that's what I would like to share with you. So I don't have any notebook or a textbook through which I would go through, but it's the life experience, the struggles of our 3 million members. That is what our university is, and that is what we call our SEWA as our own university.
અને ખાસ કહેવું છે કે બીજી જગ્યાએ જાઓ તો નોકરી માટે તમારે બાયોડેટા આપવો પડે, ઇન્ટરવ્યૂ લે, પછી તમને નોકરી આપે. પણ સેવા જેવી સંસ્થા છે કે શ્રમજીવી બહેનોની છે, અને એમાં કોઈ ભણતરની પણ બાયોડેટા નહીં માગતા કે કોઈ ડિગ્રી પણ નહીં માગતા. પણ ખરેખર બહેનોની ડિગ્રી અત્યારે હું તમારી સામે જ બેઠી છું કે આવા બહેનોને એમણે આટલા બધા આગળ લઈ ગયા છે.
If you are looking for a job, you have to apply, you have to submit your bio. There's an interview process, but it is SEWA. which doesn't ask for any CV or any biodata. There's no interview. And, women like me who are not even educated can freely walk in, share their issues, share their concerns. And yet, it prepares us to face any challenges that would come by in the life. So I'm so very grateful for it. बस હવે એમને કંઈ પૂછો.
No, thank you so much. And I'm glad you've shared as much as you have. I guess one last question I would ask is, SEWA has had a vision of what you call the economy of nurturance, and you started to talk about the elements of that. But if there's anything you haven't offered yet about what you mean by that, what does an economy of nurturance really mean?
એમ કહે છે કે મારે છેલ્લો પ્રશ્ન પૂછવો છે ને તમે ઘણું બધું કહ્યું કે જે આપણને બેન અનુબંધ અને ઇકોનોમી ઓફ નર્ચરન્સ એના ઘણા બધા પાસા તમે કયા પણ એમાંનું જો કંઈ રહી ગયું હોય જે તમારે હજી કહેવું હોય કે તમારા મતે એવું અર્થતંત્ર કેવું હોય કે જેમાં બહેનો ની માલિકી વધે બહેનોની રોજગારી વધે તો એમાં તમારે કંઈ ઉમેરવું છે હવે
એટલે તમે જે સવાલ કર્યો કે બહેનોનું અર્થતંત્ર વધે અને બહેનોની માલિકી વધે એટલે અમારો અત્યારે ધ્યેય એ જ છે કે જે અમારા 50 વર્ષ તો ગયા છે પણ બીજા 50 વર્ષ અમારે જે જવાનું છે તો અમારો અત્યારે ધ્યેય અમે રાખીએ છીએ કે અમારે પોતાને એક સ્વચ્છ આકાશ કરવાની જરૂર પડી છે અને કેમ એટલા માટે પડી છે કે અમારા જે શ્રમજીવી બહેનો છે ખેતરમાં કામ કરે છે અને એમની નાની નાની ખેતીમાં પણ બગાડ થતો હોય છે અને સ્વચ્છ આકાશના લીધે હજુ અમારી ત્રીજી ચોથી પેઢી અને આપણા પણ બધાની પેઢી જે છે એ બચી જાય કે એ આનો સામનો ના કરી શકે એટલે અમારું અર્થતંત્રમાં મારે આ જ ખાસ ઉમેરવું છે સ્વચ્છ આકાશ અને અમારું જે ગામડા છે કે શહેર હોય પણ એ આગળ ચોખ્ખાઈ હોવી જોઈએ.
I just want to add one aspect to the building economy of nurturance. I just said that, where women are the owners and the managers, it's local and decentralized. But also, how do you address the issue of climate? Because we could overcome 50 years of organizing, but we have to still if SEWA has to still celebrate 100 years of organizing, our third and fourth generation also has to, experience the kind of strength and confidence that we are experiencing. And that's where we are, the campaign has to be on building cleaner skies. So how do you ensure, whether it's in the rural areas or in the urban areas, that the women's initiative on climate action gets recognized, and how do you build cleaner skies? That is what is one aspect.
બીજું ખાસ કહેવું છે કે સેવામાં સભ્ય બહેનોને અમે એવું રાખીએ છીએ કે એવું નહીં કે અમારા આ અને અમારા એમ પણ અમે બધા હમસબ એકમાં જ રાખીએ છીએ એટલે ગઈકાલની જ વાત કરું કે અમારા જે સુરેન્દ્રનગરમાં છે મીઠા કામદાર બહેનો છે અચાનક વાવાઝોડું આવી ગયું હવે એમનો જે પાક એમને મીઠા આખું પકવેલું એની અંદર બધો દળ ઘૂસી ગયો હવે એ કશા કામનું ના રહ્યું એમની રોજગારી છીનવાઈ ગઈ એમની પાસેથી કુદરત એવી રીતે આફતો આપે છે પણ જ્યારે થયું છે પણ એ બહેનને અમે પડી નહીં જવા દઈએ પણ એમને અમે ઊભા કરીશું કે કેવી રીતે ઊભા કરવા કેમ કે એ પડી જાય તો ફરી એ ઊભા ના થઈ શકે અત્યારે પડી જ ગયા છે પણ સેવાનું સંગઠન એટલું મજબૂત છે કે એમને ઊભા કરવા માટે તૈયાર કરે છે એટલે અમે સંગઠનના આ મજબૂતાઈ બહુ આપીએ છીએ કે કોઈ બી પડી જાય તો એને ફટ અમે ઊભા કરીએ છીએ અમારા બહેનોને.
And one of the big elements of an economy of nurturance is that we don't want to progress at the cost of other workers, but whether they are in the urban areas or in the rural areas, how can we have everyone experience the fruits of development? Just to give you an example, last night, there was a big storm in one of the areas, and the salt pan workers in the little run of Kutch, their entire harvest has now been spoiled. And their entire season's work is gone. Other workers could have thought that, oh, but it was their problem. No, it is everybody's problem. And how do we help them, bounce back? That is what is an economy of nurturance, that you just don't think of, their problem, not my problem, but it is everybody's problem. And therefore, we will not allow them to suffer. All of us will come together together and be with them that they are able to bounce back. And that is what we call as our economy of nurturance.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for that vision and for your leadership. And as Kapilaben said, it's very unfair for her to speak to 50 years of the immense work that SEWA has done. But I hope that all of you have an opportunity to really walk through the exhibit and at least get a slice of the work and the impact that they've had. And to both of you, so much appreciation and gratitude for your incredible vision and leadership. So thank you.
At a quantitative instrument and a qualitative instrument where I was going to get into really in-depth questionnaires, questions with the SEWA members had 12 questions on it. We got through 3, which is when I realized that the traditional instruments of inquiry that I had gone with were not going to work at all for this project. It is my pleasure to introduce a dear friend, and colleague from New York, Rishi Goyal, also an emergency medicine doctor, but unlike most of us, a professor in the humanities. He's the director of the medical humanities major at the Institute for Comparative Literature and Society at Columbia University. He's associate professor in emergency medicine. His research interests include the health humanities, social medicine, study of the novel, medical epistemology. He's co-founding editor of the online journal Synapsis, co-founding director of the Health Language Lab, and a recipient of the National Endowment for the Humanities grant. I thought it would be more legitimate to have Rishi on stage than I, and so here.
You're right. I'm here for the legitimacy piece. So when Satchit asked me to come, I have to tell you, the last time I got involved in a Satchit adventure, I was transporting 1,000 people in the busy streets of Mumbai in 2008 after blowing up 3, 4, or 5 vehicles, perhaps a truck, in a disaster drill. That happened, unfortunately, 3 weeks before a real disaster struck Mumbai. So while that event was crazy, sort of the ways in which his projects kind of circulate and move and impact the world have always struck me, and this is obviously no different. So I just wanted to be here for a little bit. Unfortunately, can't be here this long, but I wanted to get a sense from you. He said it a little bit, he started to say it. I've known Satchit to be such a strong, thoughtful scientist. He's out there, he works with instruments, he works with surveys, he has needs assessments. He's been involved in very significant public health work for 2 decades that are objective, verifiable, paradigmatic, kind of classic scientific work. And then here I am, he's telling me he's going to do an art exhibit. I was like, what do you know about doing an art exhibit? Well, what is this? Why are you doing that? So what I want to hear from him a little bit is, how did this process change for you? I mean, I think you went in there thinking you were going to do another one of, another needs assessment, another survey. You were going to learn about kind of, again, information that you'd be able to put in a table, that you might be able to publish in a paper. But instead, you've given us this. So tell me a little bit about that.
Well, they say when you begin to write your paper, and obviously thought we'd have a blockbuster paper out of this, you start with figure 1. And I couldn't figure out what figure 1 was. And so what you were seeing in the hallways outside is figure 1. What happened in the last 30 minutes is exactly what had happened. I was speaking to the SEWA members, only trialing the qualitative instrument before the students were going to go down. It was like, let me make sure the translations are all right. I understand Gujarati. And so I went down and I got through 2 questions. They spoke for 45 minutes, experientially, extemporaneously, just as Kapilaben did right now. And what I realized I was witnessing was these extremely disadvantaged but very empowered women at the start of the 21st century, having successfully navigated the greatest public health emergency of our times, showing us what it takes to invest in communities. In medicine and public health, we've always talked about social determinants of disease. We know that social determinants influence health outcomes. But there is a little bit of reductionism going on our campuses right now, where our drive to be more diverse, more inclusive, more equitable is reduced to PowerPoints. And it takes a lot more to change societies. And it takes 50 years of backbreaking work to do this. And that is a story I felt needed to be told. It was very clear early on that that story couldn't be told in my writing, in my text, through some clever analysis, that this is best told in their voices for reasons that you just saw. And so I went to the Best Buy, Chroma in Ahmedabad, and bought a tripod and audio recording equipment. And Deepak tells me that you shouldn't show the microphone when you're filming. I didn't know that. I actually was quite sure I'll forget to press the record button. So I think every film has 3 audio tapes tagged to it, which Deepak has had to decipher. And the intention then was just that I couldn't write as fast as they spoke, and so this would be my reference material. But watching the tapes when I came back, it was very clear that their voices needed to be centered, and the story is best told by them.
I mean, a lot of things come out there for me. I think the first thing I want to highlight is you said, I spoke Gujarati, so this was going to work, right? There's a very deeply meaningful thing there that I think is important for all of us to remember, that we're losing languages. We are in the kind of global hegemony of English. We aren't experiencing difference in these ways. And Satchit's, in with these people is a kind of linguistic one. There's context, there's specificity, there's a need. Hearing Gujarati here today was just very important for me. It was very moving to think about the hallowed halls of academia, and we've got, real sort of knowledge and a local voice. There's something special and important about that. But I think maybe you could say a little bit more. So there's a great essay, for those of you who haven't read it, called The Problem of Speaking for Others. It's by Linda Alcoff. And it's about kind of what it means to speak for others. Sometimes that means speak about others. But what we saw, and I think what you did today, is that we're speaking with others, right? And you're still doing some speaking for others, right? Because there are interpretations, there's mediation, there's an entire exhibit that you and your team created. Take us through some of the kind of ethical choices that you've made there, because when I think about that essay, a couple of things that come out to me, which are questions of responsibility, questions of place, where are you speaking from, questions of mastery and domination. One of the reasons to not speak for others is to try to master or dominate them. But the most important thing that Linda Alcoff suggests is that when you speak for others, you're in some way helping them or creating effects. So maybe talk me through that in terms of the exhibit.
I asked SEWA when I didn't know what to do with the analysis I was looking at. It was overwhelming. There was a lot. There was much to unpack. And in classic SEWA fashion, they said, we'll ask the sisters. And so I was lucky there was a Karobari meeting, which is the head leadership, and they were all there. And I went in and I explained what the project was, and I'd already wasted a lot of their time through these interviews. And I said, what should I do? And I'm no longer surprised, but I was then, because those were early days of my interaction with them. And the first response I got was, go to Rome. So
of course, why not?
What? Of course, the Pope wants to hear about it. So no, tell the International Labour Organization about us. We have long years of association with them. Then go to the streets of New York and DC and tell the powerful institutions what we've been up to. Let the Indian diaspora know what their action and inaction does to our lives. Come to the streets of Bombay and Delhi and let folks know how we survived the pandemic. And they then said, come to the villages and let the others know what we at SEWA do so that they can join us as well. The mandate was quite clear. I had no idea where I was going to get time to go to all these places and meet with all these folks. And I came back and started floating this idea around with the graduate students. And this is the beauty of a campus like this, with so many strong disciplines, where you shout out something in the ether and, you know, 2 clever students will come up with a better idea than you did. And that's exactly what happened. I think Hiteshree and others suggested this traveling exhibit. I'm surrounded here by colleagues and mentors who've made it their business to never say no. So that sort of journey started with no idea what we were doing. But the one thing we were very conscious of, and I think, you know, the fact that when you invite SEWA to these organizations, even at institutions like this, you see that you will find one of the SEWA leaders speak for SEWA, right? There is no one speaking for Kapilaben here. And I think we were very cognizant of that as we started doing this. A project that I was involved with Megan Murray in a few months ago was all about community engagement and community participation. It just serendipitously happened at a time when we were thinking about this project, asking the questions without I don't have the language that you do to ask these questions, but what we were struggling with is to say, what does it mean to do this kind of research? The simple arithmetic, right? 1,000 household survey means that they invested 1,000 hours in the Harvard team. And then I interviewed, you know, women for 30 hours. So that's 1,030 hours. How do you pay back 1,030 hours? Should you not be paying back 1,030 hours? Why do we go into these communities, collect data, and disappear? Or worse, sometimes not even go into the communities, start with a data set, and then ask the most convenient question we want to ask. You know, there's a pedagogical crisis right now on our campuses, as you and I were talking about earlier, about who decides what questions to ask, what questions are worth asking, and what kind of science is considered meritorious. Why is it not acceptable to just go with the tools that you have into communities and let them ask the questions that they want to? Not to say that we shouldn't ask questions for the sake of them. I mean, that is the premise of, you know, basic science and a large research university like this. But should we, if we are, especially at times of this crisis, not also be working with communities to help them answer the questions they're interested in?
Yeah, and you're clearly doing that in your project. I mean, I think one thing that maybe you could stress to the audience a little bit is going in, you probably had assumptions, we all do, about what you were expecting to find, right? I mean, somebody described it to me as water is wet research, you know? You already know what the end outcome is. But so how were you, I think you were probably transformed, your questions were transformed, your thinking was transformed through these oral histories, these histories from below, rather than imposing a narrative from above where you thought, social distancing, vaccines, this and that, these were the problems. You know, what were you how were you transformed by these oral histories?
They were just so much richer, right? The instrument, you know, if you interview 1,000 households, you capture about 5,000 lives. There is no way you're walking away with an empty data set. There is lots of interesting information in there. But it is nearly impossible to make sense of what it is that you are finding. When you walk past the Red Zone exhibit, for example, you will see that the median household size is about 5 to 6 members, and they live in an 88 square foot home. What the instrument doesn't capture is that all the kids had to stay at home, and the kids needed constant attention because now they were not in school, and they interrupted you every 20 minutes. Like, what instrument was I going to design that was going to ask, were children irritating you during lockdown? Right, like, it is, the domestic violence rose. The men were increasingly frustrated because they were bringing in no wages, right? While the women were pivoting to figure this out. You ask how long it takes for a compensation to come in. Your quantitative instrument is going to say, 2 months, but it does not capture the struggle that you had to go in for 2 months, or in SEWA's case, for several years to get meager amounts of money that were rightfully theirs, which you will see in the construction exhibit. One of my favorite discoveries, which was heartbreaking, and the fact that it was something so simple, and if you had feedback loops with the community, the state would get this right, is food distribution. A public health instrument would have said, did you get food aid from the government? The answer is yes. Did you get food aid from SEWA? The answer is yes. But the government food aid gave you grains, and in the lockdown, the flour mills were shut, right? And so SEWA knew, therefore, to give flour and not grains.
Yeah, a big part of the story is the failed state, right? SEWA's success rests upon the fact that the state failed. And I think so I got a little bit of time to actually go through the exhibit. It's powerful. But what struck me as I was going through it and thinking about it and reading it and actually listening to Kapilaben kind of helped understand that a little bit more was there was a comment in one of the texts that said something like, the need for healthcare was the second largest reason that people broke into their assets or basically went bankrupt, right? Which is the same thing in the United States. The healthcare bills are, I think, the primary reason people go bankrupt. The irony of that, is just it's devastating. It's really, really terrible. What I was surprised by listening to a lot of the oral histories is that there wasn't more like rage, that there wasn't more anger. And I don't know, I would want to hear from you about just the affect or the emotion. You got 30 hours. We only got small clips. What was and I mean, I think I would know it. I think I'm shocked by the lack of rage and anger. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and there's no despair either.
No despair
so
either.
There's no rage and there's no despair. And I think that was one of the things that propelled me to want to tell the story and tell the story about the movement as well, right? So then I'm stepping away from sort of a pure analysis of what was the impact of the pandemic on SEWA, which was the mandate, right? So Reema then said, hey, you do post-disaster assessments, you've spent all these years with Jennifer, you must have learned something. Why don't you help us measure the impact of the pandemic on SEWA? But sort of very quickly, what I realized as I was looking at really solutions for solving intractable social problems that we are going to face as a society as the climate changes. And so it goes back to the founding principles. Initially, when the genesis story of SEWA, and you'll read this on the walls as well, is head loaders, so folks that had to women who carried bales of cloth between retailers and wholesalers in Ahmedabad were given unfair wages. And when they protested that, Ila Benpat, who founded SEWA, who then was at the Textile Labor Association, writes a strongly worded op-ed, which, in those days and age, if it was in the newspaper, it must be true, and talked about these wages. So the merchants wrote a counter op-ed and said, this is not true. We're actually paying 5 rupees and not 3 rupees. And they said, great. And they cut out the op-ed and photocopied it and gave copies to all these women in the market. So every time they were given 3 rupees, they said, no, but you said 5. So they had to pay 5. So they're very emboldened with that. The women then go to the government and say, we want to form our own union. And the government says, how can you? You have no employer. Who are you against? And that's when they said, we're not against anyone, we're for ourselves, we're for the women. Right? So this is a Gandhian organization where nonviolence is in thought, word, and deed.
And thought.
And thought is key here. What you will find is this powerful resilience, but not hatred. And I found that in stark contrast to the decibels in the United States in our political discourse, right? So this is 2022, and we had just recovered from a very hard time, not knowing that harder times were ahead of us. And the anger and hatred that you constantly hear in discourse here and in India as well was completely absent in this organization when they had all the reason to be angry, to rage, and to despair.
Beautiful answer. I think there would be a number of different directions I would love to go in right now, but unfortunately, I'm going to catch a train soon. So I think that as you maybe go through the exhibit, a few spots that I just wanted to highlight that kind of struck me were the importance of technology, because I know it's actually important element for Satchit's thinking generally. He uses technology in really phenomenally different ways. We saw the kind of beautiful exhibit that's there. But technology and gender has a kind of a fraught relationship, and I think that is really foregrounded here. Often technology is seen as, an extension of the male body, a tool, a hammer, a gun, a weapon. But there are technologies of nurturance, the nurturing economy. There are technologies of care. Many, many technologies that are associated with women's labor are incredibly important. Weaving, looming, farming, all of these, sustaining, feeding. These are traditionally thought of as women's labors. You can see the incredible technological investment in these, but we disregard them. So I think that that's a really kind of primary objective that pops out for me in the show. Thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you for coming. Sorry, Rishi has to run to his Amtrak to get onto Uber waiting for him. A question we wanted to explore, and which I will answer, is why this from the House of Medicine? And I think it's really important that we do more of this. The humanities are shrinking on all our campuses, and I think we need them more now than before. Caroline Bucky, who's in the room, and I had talked about this late 2020, that scientists felt like the science bit was done when the vaccine was invented, right? And what we hadn't recognized is how much we had failed to engender trust in society. Sheila was here a while ago, Sheila Jasanoff, who started a whole conversation on campus about a trust in science with the Harvard Data Science Initiative. These are important conversations that places like this campus and institutions like ours elsewhere in the US really ought to engage in. Much of the stories we were trying to tell cannot be captured in dry academic papers, and that is not to say that it isn't important to get the scientific literature out. And of course we will, and so will this team. But we think it is important when we have the kinds of resources we do at this institution to see how we can leverage the partnerships across our schools to tell these stories. I'm looking at representatives from the Sarita Institute here as they prepare this university to take on climate change. How are we going to engage with the very communities that we are also so worried about? With that, I welcome Hiteshree to do a brief walkthrough of the exhibit here. I am overwhelmed on behalf of our team to see this very crowded room, but that also means we can't actually walk, all 150 of you through the exhibit. So we will all be outside. We will talk about the installations with you, but Hiteshree is going to give us a little teaser. Here's the star of this evening, Hiteshree.
Thank you. Good evening. So the exhibition is a collection of 12 installations that center the voices of SEWA members. It combines art, artifacts, and graphics that draw from our research to invite you to inhabit the spaces occupied by the women during the pandemic. This photograph marks the celebration of the national policy for street vendors in Ahmedabad, setting the tone for our narrative, which is a story of joy and not of despair, rather one of resilience. We see Kapilaben Bhatt, the founder of SEWA here, celebrating with her sisters, Manjula Ben to the left, and Manali Ben, who's now the National Secretary at SEWA, who's in the background to the right, when the policy was first announced in 2004. The intricate tapestry that you may have noticed on your way down to the concourse was designed and created by 50 SEWA members across the country. You will see that the individual strands of warp rise and unite as the organization is enriched and strengthened over decades. The 3 stripes across the middle represent the only 3 days when work stopped before the weavers pivoted to making masks. SEWA's 5-decade-long timeline and the early pandemic timelines are best viewed in juxtaposition from the concourse level. The text-heavy design choice is an acknowledgement of the painstaking and patient work that goes behind building movements and investing in communities. The 3 gates and the red zone represent the life on streets and within confines of one-room dwellings, as 43 million migrant workers walked long miles home as soon as the lockdown was announced. This installation includes powerful oral histories from street vendors whose outdoor lives were appended by closure of the markets, and indoors by the constant presence of both the male members and children cramped in quarters day and night. Colleagues on campus questioned the universality of the wisdom of lockdowns. You must have passed the You're on Mute installation on your way to this auditorium, which is a display of 80 phone screens that explores the central role that digital technology played in reinforcing solidarity across the organization when physical companionship was unthinkable. It documents the financial, educational, and health service innovations that were critical in stabilizing livelihoods, schooling, and health. And then we have the somber Everybody Counts installation as you exit here to your left, which examines SEWA's health interventions in context of a struggling health system response to the pandemic. Several Harvard faculty members continued to advocate for contextualization of India's clinical guidelines, cognizant that vast majority of Indians could ill afford the scarce and questionable resource-intensive treatment they would feel compelled to pursue. The small farm holdings that persist in both rural and peri-urban areas serve as the source for farm-to-table diets in Indian households across all income groups. Despite being the leading producer of several food commodities, most Indians faced insecurity during the pandemic, even greater than usual. This data visualization traces how 2 decades of producing, owning, and managing their food production network called Rudy members successfully distributed essential goods and generated employment at the height of the pandemic. Burden of proof lays bare the bureaucratic tedium and societal indifferences that shackle hope and curb human potential, whereas where those with very few means have to fight so much to gain so little. Throughout these installations, you will hear from SEWA members themselves and witness their grit, their determination, their resolve, their commitment to cooperation, and their ability to solve problems from within the confines of the hard-fought spaces they have created, and above all, the dignity with which the poorest amongst us conduct themselves. Salt, Wind, and Fire presents SEWA's vision for the next 50 years as members experience climate change through the uncertainty it foists on their food, habitat, and wages. This installation celebrates their many innovations, both past and future, including collaborations across our campus that many present in this room are involved in. The quote by SEWA's founder, Kapilaben Bhatt, that you see on the wall flanked by the doors leading to a promising garden beyond speaks to the fundamental role that societal determinants play in influencing health outcomes, just as the German pathologist Virchow had observed in the 19th century. Virchow also said, politics is after all nothing more than medicine on a grand scale.
I welcome you to enjoy the exhibition. We're also now online and live at SAB EK.net. We've donated all 30 hours of oral history thanks to SEWA, to the Countway Library, Harvard's library, History of Medicine archive, so other researchers can work with the material right away. We are delighted also to share that we will be going from here to the World Bank headquarters atrium in DC, and then to the Clinton Global Initiative in New York in fall this year. Please join us outside. Welcome.